How about you?
Good, good, good. Well, thank you for being here. We are going to fade out our music and get started. There we go. All right. So, hello, everyone. I'm Natasha Nurse, a founder of Dressing Room 8, neurodivergent innovator, here with the wonderful, the one and only Hope Anderson. Tell us a little bit about yourself before we dive into our full conversation.
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me, Natasha. I am Hope. I teach Spanish and linguistics at Arizona State University, and I founded Teaching Solved a couple of years ago to help solve some of the problems that I have faced as an educator of Spanish my whole career, as well as the issues that I see students having with language learning, as well as other educators who I've worked with at many different institutions over the years. It all sort of percolated for a long time, and then I enrolled in the entrepreneurship master's at ASU a couple of years ago 3 years ago, actually, to build my business. And so I did. I built my business and I launched my business.
That is amazing. And shout out to ASU because that is how we met. I fell in love with Hope and what she's doing through the Chandler Innovation Center at ASU. And so we are just excited to have this conversation and help people get more awareness and understanding of the great work you're doing and this amazing summit that's coming up. So first, tell us about the business, how you got started, what are some of the pain points like you were addressing quickly before as to what you're solving, and then we'll get into the summit.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you so much for this opportunity. Yeah, the pain point that I have always had is literally just like staying up late, trying to prepare lessons that I thought would be useful for my students, and then trying to balance, creating new lessons versus creating assignments that may take a long time to grade, but may be beneficial for their learning. So kind of going back and forth between assignment and lesson creation, and just spending a ton of time doing trial and error for the students. And some things tend to work, and some things don't. I could put hours into creating something, and it could be over in 5 minutes, or it could be useful, or it could be not. And so I ended up having to go back to grad school and get my PhD in second language acquisition and teaching at the University of Arizona while I was out there teaching, because I wanted to figure out if we could understand better how people learn, then we can figure out better how to teach. I also got a lot of help in learning to teach from the California World Language Project. I was, shout out to them, I was teaching in Monterey at the time, so I went to the Monterey Bay location, and they were doing workshops once a month for language teachers who were basically nominated by their schools or a combination of people from the local area. And I just got to participate in those activities as a student and learn a little bit of Japanese, a little bit of French. And so I was able to figure out better like what worked without doing a whole bunch of trial and error myself. And that propelled me to want to learn more, which is why I went back and got my degree in second language acquisition and teaching. But even still, I talked to teachers who had the same pain points. They either didn't know about those professional organizations, or workshops like that didn't exist in their area, or they would go to a workshop or a conference and learn all these wonderful things, but then they would go back to class on Monday and they would still have to teach out of the same book. And oftentimes it was antithetical to the kinds of things they were learning in their professional development. They would have to go back and I suffered from this as well. I would go back and have to figure out how to teach this particular grammar point on Monday after the focus on Saturday in our workshop was about communication. And so I was trying to figure out how to juggle that. And so my whole career, I've basically gone back and forth between, do I want to be in a role where I can influence teachers by giving them the support that they need directly one-on-one? Do I want to be in a position where I can select materials? Do I want to be in a position where I can create materials that might get adopted by different institutions? And I realized that with my own company, I could kind of do all of that, because I could be training people in their situation that they're in right now with their existing materials or with new materials. I can be creating materials and be responsive to their needs. I get emails from people using my product telling me what particular parts they like and want more of. Some people are using it more for sub plans. Some people are using it more for getting the students exposed to more input. Some of them are using it more for conversation, but then other times people are taking those conversation questions and they're turning it into assignments to put online, which suggests that I maybe need to use some of that myself to create assignments that they can, with rubrics that they can then assign. So all of these are giving me, input into, feedback on kind of what their continued pain points are, as well as how I can make my product better to address these pain points. And I do want to mention that I do have the product Lesson Magic right now in Spanish and French primarily, a little bit of English for teacher trainers. So it's not as dependent upon what language they're going to be teaching in the future, as well as working on Portuguese.
Okay, awesome. And we, when we met, talked about like me being neurodivergent. How does that play a role into the lesson planning, how the information is received by the students, any of that type of stuff?
Yeah, so it's funny because people oftentimes talk about learning styles, and are you a visual
Hmm.
learner, are you a kinesthetic learner, are you an auditory
Hmm.
learner, and then that's
Hmm.
also been debunked, right? So there's a big like debate right now in the field
Yeah.
about like whether people are still clinging to those learning styles or whether they're moving past that.
Okay.
I kind of tried to skirt that issue a little bit by saying learning preferences, right? That way you don't have to necessarily say
Mm,
like which side of the fence of that argument you're on. But it
gotcha.
is true that a lot of times in language learning, people do have, whether it's real or whether it's just kind of a placebo effect from hearing about learning styles over the years,
Yeah.
they do have their preferred way of learning. And oftentimes, I
Hmm.
think in language, if students cling very tightly to that one area, then it tends to impact the other areas either positively or negatively. So, for example, if you
Mm,
know that you're a visual learner or you
hmm.
think that you're a visual learner and you look at a script while you are doing listening activities, you can
Hmm.
gradually take away that script and see if you can still understand it. So you can support your weaker areas using
Mm,
your stronger areas. But if
okay.
you neglect the listening skill entirely because you think you're a visual learner and you never learn the sound system of the language,
Yeah.
this could be a problem, right? So
Mm,
so knowing kind of how to balance that, I think, is helpful, as well as having the teacher realize that not every student in the class is going to be learning the same way, not necessarily because of learning styles, but
hmm.
because the teacher is someone who learned language and loved language so much that they wanted to go and become a language teacher. I can
Mm,
guarantee you that most, if not all, of the students in the class are not going to have that same perspective. It doesn't mean they're not going to be able to enjoy the class, but it means
yeah.
they are not going to necessarily learn despite the instructional method.
Okay.
Their learning is going to be a lot more dependent on the instructional method. Like I always joke with language teachers that we are language nerds. We could swallow a grammar book and be happy, right? I mean,
Hmm.
I have had students who, after the first day of class, go home and write an assignment and come back using grammar we haven't learned yet. And I kind of raise an eyebrow, like, was this Google Translate? And they tell me how they arrived at that using their knowledge of other languages. And I went, oh, okay, this is interesting. This is not something that I expected,
Yeah.
but on the other hand, we do have this reliance now on Google Translate and AI, which, sure, in a pinch, if you're working with refugees and you don't have a language in common, absolutely use all the tools at your
Hmm.
disposal. But if you're learning a language and you always use those tools
Yeah.
because you don't understand the assignment, because you don't know how it's going to be useful in your future,
Hmm.
then you're going to get to the point where it's going to be really, really hard for you because you don't have those foundational skills. So being able
Mm,
to navigate where our students are,
yeah.
how if they see an easier way, they're going to
Yeah.
take it, but it's not necessarily going to be easier down the road. So
Mm,
navigating those technology tools, navigating how they prefer to learn, navigating kind of where they are in their life and how they expect to use it in the future,
yeah.
these are all very important. And honestly, I do believe I'm neurodivergent as well. I mean, I get definitely the hyperfixations on things. That's part of how I learned so much Spanish in a short time, and I didn't grow up speaking it, so that I
Wow.
could go on and learn to teach it.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I also can't expect that all of my students, even if they are neurodivergent, have the same experiences I have and the same special interests that I have. So,
Yeah.
I think this is something that, if it doesn't interest them, they're not going to do it.
Yeah.
And then later on, it's going to be harder and harder, right?
Okay.
Also, I think a lot of times students who are neurodivergent or have learning disabilities, which I know are not one and the same, but sometimes there's overlap, right?
Yeah.
Um, have adapted, have developed coping skills that aren't necessarily always going to help them. Like I've had students before who have dyslexia or other learning
Mm,
disabilities who sometimes their way of getting by in an activity, if they don't understand, like because they haven't developed those foundational skills, is
mhm.
to unfortunately distance themselves even more from getting those skills. Because if a student always calls you over, and this one I feel so bad
Yeah.
because it took me a semester and a half to realize it. And I'm not sure because in college they don't tell us what the learning disability is, they just tell us what the accommodations are. So I don't
Yeah.
actually know what, if any, official learning disabilities she had been diagnosed with. But I did notice a particular student who would always call me over to ask me some unrelated question whenever we would do a conversation activity. She would either turn to the student next to her and have him translate it all for her, or she would call me over and say, oh, I had a question about the quiz or about the feedback I got on this assignment or whatever. And then I realized she was avoiding doing the conversation activities.
Interesting.
And in doing that, she was actually preventing herself from gaining more of those skills. What she
Yeah.
needed was someone to step in and say, hey, what do you need so you can do this activity? And it
Mm,
took me so long to realize this that I was like, oh, I wonder how much she's missed, because
yeah.
her coping skill that she had developed had been to basically stop doing the activity and distract the teacher with something else.
Yeah.
And and I realized this, that how can we step in and make sure that students are acquiring these skills before,
Hmm.
I wouldn't say it's too late, but before they get to the point where they feel that it's too late to catch up.
Mm,
And these are all things that I feel like if, I'm building them into my product so that if teachers are doing these varieties of activities from the very beginning, it's not that the students, I don't want them to feel like they have to learn enough to get to the point where they can do a conversation. I want them to start being able
mm,
to do a conversation from that very first day. So
yeah.
that, yeah, it's not going to be super, super accurate. It's not going to be super, super complex. And that's totally fine because you're going to
Yeah.
be gaining those skills as you go along. And I think
Mm,
that is something that, it gets harder and harder if you have to teach really hard grammar points and the students don't even have a basic level of comprehension, because
yeah.
then they end up asking you things like, when would you ever say that? And someone asked me that one time in a Spanish 102.
Mm,
When would you ever say that? When I had a sample sentence on the board. And right, I kind of was at a loss. And so
yeah.
this is why if the materials are more authentic, if they come out of more of the real world uses of the language and the students preferred uses of the languages in the future, like what kind of situation are they in college? It's great, where do you work, right? Most students have a job, or they
Mm,
have a field that they already have identified as what they want to do in the future. So
yeah.
what do you need in your job right now? What are you going to need in the future, right? High
Mm,
school students as well, may have a job or may have a career path. It may change a few times, they may not know that yet, right? But it's still, it's oftentimes very important to connect that to what they need right now, so that they can see, oh, these are skills, I can go out and use them, and I can come back, right?
mhm.
And or connect them to some genre of music or movies or other area of their life, sports that they already know that they like, but connect them to where they can find information about that in the language they're learning.
Yeah.
And then they can start training their social media feed to give them more content that they're interested in the language that they're learning.
Yes.
It
Yes.
takes
Yes. Yes.
time with the algorithm, but you can do it. So
I
getting
love
those
that.
connections is really, really helpful.
Absolutely. And with that, I think that's the perfect opportunity to talk about kind of what led you to formulating and launching the Arizona World Language Leadership Summit 2025 that's happening next week.
Yeah. So I'm really excited about this event. It's the first of its kind in Arizona. Usually the types of advocacy that we do are kind of, like for like I said, the California World Language Project, it's aimed
Mhm.
at teachers. Oftentimes we have like our state language conference or our regional or national language conferences, sometimes by language, sometimes all languages. There's
Mhm.
many, many different organizations, but it's usually focused at teachers. And
Mm,
oftentimes, like I said, that instruction that teachers get, it's like, wow, okay, it's eye-opening, but then I have to go back to my same situation that I'm teaching in on Monday. And so by
mhm.
having an event that's aimed at administrators, not that administrators can't come to the other ones, but
Yeah.
everyone's busy. So by having an event that's aimed at administrators, it aims to really show people who are in charge of coordination or evaluation of teachers or selection of materials and curriculum,
Mm,
where the gaps are, right? What the teachers are asking for, because oftentimes the teachers know better than to ask their own school or district for something. They have either asked and been told no, or sometimes, worst case, it even makes them raise an eyebrow at like, what are you using that you're not supposed to be using because it's not approved, right? And so
mm,
I don't want teachers to feel like the burden is entirely on them to constantly advocate for their needs, because the squeaky wheel gets the grease. The squeaky wheel also gets an extra observation and evaluation and maybe some punishment. And so
mm.
it's something that I think that as a profession, we need to really be trying to figure out how to connect all of those areas. And especially in Arizona, this is an issue that I've run into over and over and over when trying to get my product out there. Right now, I believe all of my subscribers come from states outside of Arizona. It is costing me a lot of money to go to conferences and in other states and promote my
Mhm.
product and get subscribers, because in Arizona, there are a lot more restrictions on what teachers are allowed to use. Now, of course, you can always pay for something with your own money and just not tell your school you're using it. But I think a lot
Yeah.
of times teachers, one, don't feel like they should have to do that? And two, why should the administration, not know about these products and not have the opportunity to adopt them, right? And so, and
Okay.
it's not just something for me. I mean, I have all the presenters coming in as well. Oftentimes they are from, some of them are from consulting companies, some of them are from textbook
Mm.
publishers, some of them are from other organizations like the $1 Million Teacher Project. Shout out,
Mhm.
that's yet another way to support teachers.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to really get all of these people in a room so that the state supervisor from World Languages is supposed to be there. People from the
Mm.
district offices of a lot of local districts and from around the state are supposed to be there. We have some
Nice.
language teachers coming as well to participate, and we have presenters from all over the country coming in
Nice.
who either are making it work in their district or have their own product or have their own expertise in some area of this space for
Okay.
world languages. And I also wanted to mention a similar event, which has been happening for about 6 years now for dual language immersion in Arizona. They
Mhm.
have the Arizona DLI network, and they have the Arizona DLI Leadership Academy. And for the first time this year, they launched the DLI Teacher Academy, with
Mm.
the idea being that it's really like more of a workshop focus for these
Mm.
administrators and teachers to figure out how to make dual language immersion work in their district or at their school. So they
Yeah.
actually do a site visit. They do a 3-day sequence where they actually work on like what proficiency level do the students need to be at by 4th grade, for example,
Yeah.
in this district, and that sort of thing. And I developed mine independently from that, but taking some lessons from it as well, because nothing has been done similar to that for world language electives, for world language courses that are
Mhm.
not dual language immersion. So just like a little tidbit about the difference, dual language immersion is when you start doing all your school subjects from kindergarten or from 1st grade in either in the language or in a combination of the language and English, so
Mhm.
that you can, and ideally you have kids coming in from, like if you're doing Spanish English immersion, you're doing like a Spanish speaking background for like 50% of the kids and an English speaking background for 50% of the kids. In reality, it's never
Mm.
really 50-50, but the idea is you're getting both of those home languages
Mhm.
together, and the kids can teach each other as well as learning from the teachers in both languages. And that is what is fortunately happening more and more in a lot of schools in Arizona, so that we can, not just with Spanish, but also with Chinese, so that we can start getting those languages really supported in the schools. And the studies
Mhm.
have shown that if you have that home language supported, over and over, studies have shown that not only by 5th grade or throughout your school career, you not only do
Mhm.
better in English because your home language is supported, you also start doing better in math and science and in other areas in your
Mm.
classroom grades, as well as in your standardized testing.
That's
And
powerful.
the
Yeah.
more that the school administrators understand these things, the more they can learn how to better support those languages. But the same thing is also true in the reverse. If you are
Mhm.
exposed to another language at an early
Mhm.
age, and are able to stick with it, then that's going to help you in not only to be bilingual, but also to be better off in your academic subjects, even in English. And
Okay.
so
Yeah.
being able to expand that beyond that dual immersion framework and figure out, okay, how can we start arriving at better outcomes for our world language classes in
Yeah.
even in world language electives, is super important to me and
Mhm.
helpful for our kids and our future, because it's really something that oftentimes people have heard of someone saying, or it's happened to them themselves, oh, I took 4 years of Spanish, but I can't really speak it. Well, if that's the expectation, if people
Mm.
think, oh, we have to offer this because it's a requirement to get into an Arizona university, and in many states this is the case, it's either a graduation requirement or
Mhm.
a requirement to get into a state university, um, then we have to offer it. But I think the expectation is very low. We don't really expect the kids to be getting a lot out of it. Or, well, we don't have standardized testing for this subject, and so our
Yeah.
state funding for our school is not determined by how well the kids do in Spanish or French or Chinese or sign language. And so I think
Mhm.
it becomes less of a priority for a school, just out of necessity. And so, by having an event that focuses solely on world language learning and is geared at administrators, the idea
Mhm.
is to help break down some of these blockers that prevent schools from finding out what their language teachers need,
Okay.
or prevent districts from. I mean, every district has some kind of approval process for supplementary materials.
Mhm.
So a district could take a product like mine and send it out through this process for approval. It might get approved, it might not. But I think most districts are unwilling to even send a supplementary material out, because, like, they tell me when I contact them about it, well, we already have a curriculum. And that
Mm.
curriculum is a textbook.
Yeah.
And in 7 years, that textbook adoption cycle will start over and I could submit one, but it's not a textbook. And so that's the problem I've been running into and other supplementary material publishers have been running into, which is
Yeah.
if it's not a textbook, it's hard to get it even sent out for approval.
Mm.
And so then the adoption becomes just dependent upon whether the teacher is willing to pay on their own. And so it's very hard to ramp up some of the sales, especially in states like Arizona, where the districts just don't have a way to get that product sent out for approval. And,
Okay.
you can get on the approved vendor list, but if no one actually places that purchase order, then where do you go from there? And so that's why I usually go out of state to try to find districts and schools, especially private schools or individual teachers who might say, wow, this is great. It's going to save me a ton of time. So I guess I haven't really talked about what the product is either. So
I was going to say, so before we go there, just like a real kind of sum up, what are the 3 main takeaways that folks will get by attending Arizona World Language Leadership Summit?
Yeah, so connections to resources, first and foremost, the organizations that are presenting. Some of them are materials, some of them are consulting, but some of them just knowing that these organizations are there, I think and where they can turn for resources for their school, either for the next adoption cycle or free or low cost things, or just people who are out there to run ideas by and ideas to bring back for professional development for their school. Because oftentimes that's an issue as well, is the professional development may not be geared specifically to world language teachers. So just the resources that are there. Some things that they can implement in terms of supervising and evaluating the teachers. Sometimes that I think that, if they're not coming from a world language background, the administrators may not know what to look for in a classroom. What does it need to look like, right? What does the teacher need to be doing? What do the students need to be doing? Because there's a huge push, of course, for student-centered instruction. But what does that look like in a language class when there needs to be some language coming in, right? It needs to not just be the students just talking to each other because then language isn't coming in. But if you never have the students talking to each other because the teacher is just going through the content that's in the book, they never have the opportunity to develop language either. So from an evaluation and supervision perspective, what do those classes need to look like? And then third, the other one, I mean, there's more than 3, but I could go on all day. How people have made some of these restrictions work in other districts. We have the Texas Foreign Language Association Administrator of the Year, Ashley Sambalek, coming in to do an important session for us because she's going to be talking about how she's made it work in her district in Texas, with how you have these restrictions. You have the monetary restriction, you have some of the red tape type restrictions, but how can you make world language instruction succeed? And so some of those lessons. And then the fourth, if I could add a fourth as well, we have an amazing session on heritage language learning, which is important for the Spanish speakers and Navajo and other Native American language speakers in our state, having instruction that's geared specifically to them, either in separate classes geared to their needs or in mainstream classes, but how we can make sure the needs of those students who speak the language at home are, or whose families traditionally speak the language and come from that culture, are being met in our world language classes. So those are just 4 of and assessment as well. We have a session on assessment. We have all kinds of things they're going to take away from this.
Where do they go to sign up to register for free? And
yes, for free. It's next Friday, April 25th in Scottsdale, South Scottsdale. So if you're coming from Chandler, Gilbert, et cetera, it's not super far. teachingsolved.com. And then there's a little link up in the top corner that says AWLLS 25. If you're on mobile, you have to click the little 3 lines, the hamburger menu first to get there, but then AWLLS 25. I do have to give the caterer a number today, but I'm going to, have a little bit more wiggle room so that if we can keep getting people signing up over the next week, you will still be fed. You will get breakfast. You will get lunch. We're accommodating gluten-free, dairy-free, meat-free, nut-free. We're accommodating diets. So please join us if you're a language teacher. It is on a Friday, so I know it'll be harder for language teachers to attend, but administrators, please come. Send people from your district schools, K-12, community college, universities, welcome as well. A lot of times I think community college and university folks are more able to attend on a Friday. So
perfect.
Here we are.
And then as you were talking, before we wrap this up, talk through how does a person get the product, and how do they use it? Like, and then I think
Yeah.
that'd be helpful. Yeah.
So yeah, so lesson magic, the idea is to help you create lessons more quickly or use existing materials so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. I think a lot of times people's first go-to right now is ChatGPT. ChatGPT, write me a lesson on, and I have tried that just for comparison to see what it does. And the problem is really that you don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel if these materials are already out there and are already created in beautiful slides that correspond with the theme, that use the vocabulary, that link to all the authentic materials. The ideal goal in the paid version, the subscription version, $20 a month, first 30 days free, is that you have access to all of the pre-made lessons as well. But even just the free version has all of the links that I have found that correspond to your topic. So you can basically put in the vocabulary, grammar, or culture that's in the scope and sequence of your book. And you say, okay, I have to teach this topic next, but I want to teach using all these things that I've learned at these workshops that I've gone to or that I've been reading about online, but I don't have time to do it all myself. Where do I go to find readings, videos, interactive activities, lessons created by other teachers or that exist out in the real world that match up with the topics, that highlight the vocabulary, that use the grammar in context? And that is the main technical innovation of this, is it actually finds pages. If you put in like present subjunctive or whatever grammar topic you have to teach next, rather than the student sitting there going, when would I ever use this? It literally finds you authentic web pages as well as resources created by teachers that use the subjunctive with your vocabulary or culture theme for your unit. So you can click on something and there's like suddenly a post from Reddit, or there's suddenly something that's like an inspirational graphic that uses it, or all these things that use it in context that are available to you. So you can put that in your lesson, and you can say, this is how you would use it, right? Let's use this as a jumping off point. What does this now? Create your own. Then you can have students, create their own or whatever, right?
And how does that look like for the user? What is it like? Yeah, describe the experience. Yeah.
If you're teaching about travel with past tenses, you can suddenly find travel reviews that use the verbs that you're using in your unit. Then tell the students, now write your own, right? About, imagine that you went to this place that we're studying about in the unit. Write your own review, right? And so that's how you can chain it all together. And then every week or month, I'm basically adding more lessons to the site that have all these things created. So by chance, if you have the combination of things or a piece of that, right, that's in your unit, like I have I have about 3 environmental lessons by this point that are matched up with different types of grammar, different cultural components. So if you're teaching about the environment, but you're teaching with this grammar point or this, and I have several of them in French as well. So you have all these different lessons at your disposal that you can mix and match, because, you shouldn't have to go to Teachers Pay Teachers and buy a lesson every single time you want to use something in class. Ideally, you would have your school pay for a subscription to this so that you can have all these things and more, and new things being added constantly.
Very cool. And do you envision this product going outside of the world language space and it being utilized for history or math or anything like that? Or
in fact, math teachers have often told me that this is something that they would like to see for math as well, because these real world applications, if you could put in, a certain type of math function and have real world pages come up that say, this is how NASA used it. This is how, like that would be, and I don't know how to find that yet, but that is on my list for, I mean, that is why I intentionally named it something that didn't specifically have to do with languages, so that we can have some spillover into other areas outside of language.
Incredible. So that was a lot of information. I imagine folks are going to want to know more about the summit, more about what you're doing.
Yeah.
What's the best place for folks to get in touch with you?
Yeah, so teachingsolved.com with a D.com is my website, where everything is going on there right now. We are getting close to launching a new version with a completely new look that has the same information in an easier to access format. No official launch date yet, but it's getting closer. And also on social media, you can find me the most on Instagram at Teaching Solved. I also post most things over to Facebook. LinkedIn and X are a little bit less, and YouTube are a little bit less updated, but there's still a lot of good information there, especially a bank of videos on YouTube about our previous events and about language learning tips. I have a lot of short videos on my YouTube at Teaching Solved, with a lot of a lot of teaching tips as well for
Beautiful.
languages. So yeah, so that's
Amazing.
the best place to find me on LinkedIn. I'm Hope M Anderson. You got to put in the M. But then you also can find the company on LinkedIn, Teaching
Mhm.
Solved, or just Google Teaching Solved, makes the website come up.
I
So
love it. This is so exciting. And I want to champion you for the brilliance and the innovation and the helpfulness that you are giving teachers and administrators to be able to make learning more evolved and
mhm.
hopefully more effective. Because I think that what you're giving to them is a boost in productivity for them, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And just going back to what you said about the
Yeah.
neurodivergence earlier, I think especially neurodivergents are more likely to be boat rockers because we have a very strong sense of injustice and social justice. And I
Mm,
think
mm,
sometimes we're like, if we see a problem, we want to fix
yeah.
it. And I want to empower teachers to be able to do that at their school without, running afoul of things. So I really want to
Yeah.
get the product adopted by schools because I don't want to be someone who comes in and rocks the boat and gives people, sort of that validation for their own ideas without the follow through, without the way
Yeah.
to do it every single day at their school. And so I think that that's another awesome connection that I'm so happy that we met. And thank you so much for having
Absolutely.
me today.
Oh, yeah. I can't wait for the summit and I can't wait to keep talking with you. Thank you, everyone who watches this here on the live, but then also on the replay. Share this out, register, come to the summit, meet Hope and myself in person as well. And we'll take it from there. You have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much for being here, Hope.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
All right. Bye.